Welcome, my dear friends. If you like the video, please comment below and hit that like button. For more exciting and informative videos, subscribe and ring the bell for updates. Your support truly helps us grow and reach more people. Thank you. Let's dive in. It started subtly, as these things often do, with a sound I almost convinced myself wasn't there at all. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the rustle of leaves, the sighing of the hemlocks, the usual forest noises amplified by the solitude. But even as I said it, as I busied myself hammering tent stakes into the loamy earth beside Hemlock Creek, a knot of unease tightened in my gut. My name's Ethan Hayes, and until a few months ago I was just another cog in the corporate machine, a middle-aged accountant grinding away in a soul-crushing cubicle farm. Then came the divorce. Clean amicable, they called it. But divorce is never clean, and it certainly never feels amicable. Not when it rips a hole in the fabric of your life, leaving you adrift. I'd come to the Allegheny National Forest seeking silence, seeking escape, seeking some semblance of the peace Maria had promised we'd find together. Years ago, when we'd first dreamed of a life less calculated, the campsite was perfect, secluded just off a barely discernible forest road, beside a creek that gurgled and chuckled over smooth stones. Hemlock trees, ancient and towering, formed a natural cathedral around the clearing, their needled branches filtering the late afternoon sun into dappled patterns on the forest floor. I'd spent years refining my camping setup, and within an hour my tent was pitched. My gear organized, and a small fire pit ringed with stones was ready for kindling. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the stale recycled air of my office and the exhaust-choked streets of the city. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet that bled into the deep green of the forest, a fragile sense of calm began to descend. I sat by the nascent fire, nursing a lukewarm beer, watching the flames lick at the dry twigs and branches. The silence, initially so profound, began to fill with the subtle orchestra of the woods. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted distantly, and the creek sang its ceaseless song. It was then, just as the last sliver of sun dipped below the tree line, that I heard it again. A whisper, so faint it was almost subliminal, lost in the murmur of the creek and a sigh of the wind. I paused, beer halfway to my lips, and listened intently. Nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and the ambient sounds of the forest. Wind, I muttered to myself, taking a long pull from the beer. Just the wind playing tricks. But the thought didn't quite settle. There was a quality to that sound, an articulation that felt deliberate. Not the random rustling of leaves, but something shaped, formed, almost vocal. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue, the long drive, the sudden shift from the constant noise of city life to the profound quiet of the wilderness. I was probably just hypersensitive, my mind still reeling from the emotional wreckage of the past few months, projecting voices where there were none. As the fire grew stronger, casting dancing shadows that stretched and swayed with the flickering flames, the whispers returned. This time they were clearer, more insistent, no longer lost in the background noise. They seemed to ride on the very air itself, a soft, breathy sibilance that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. And then, unmistakably, I heard it. My name. Ethan. It was barely audible, a breath of sound, yet it cut through the forest silence like a knife. I froze, every muscle tensed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan there was again, closer this time, closer and clearer. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't my imagination. Someone, something, was whispering my name. I stood abruptly, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, my eyes straining to penetrate the shadows that clung to the edges of the clearing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the vast stillness of the forest. Silence. Only the fire crackled, mocking my sudden fear. I grabbed my flashlight, a high-powered tactical Model ID bought on a whim, and swept the beam around the clearing, its harsh white light cutting through the gloom. Nothing, just trees, underbrush, the dark, still water of the creek reflecting the starlight. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time, my voice laced with a tremor I couldn't quite control. "Is anyone there?" Again, silence answered me. The forest remained indifferent, unmoved, as if holding its breath, watching me with ancient, unknowable eyes. I circled the clearing, my flashlight beam dancing nervously, searching for any sign of another human presence. Footprints in the soft earth, a discarded cigarette butt. Anything, but there was nothing. The clearing was pristine, untouched, as if I were the first person to ever set foot there. The whispers started again, softer now, almost seductive, weaving themselves into the background hum of the night. Ethan, they seemed to be coming from all around me, emanating from the trees themselves, rising from the ground, carried on the wind. It was impossible, illogical, yet undeniably real. My unease deepened, morphing into a prickling sense of dread. That this wasn't just the wind. This wasn't just my imagination. This was something else. Back at the fire, I tried to rationalize it, to find some explanation, however improbable, that didn't involve disembodied voices calling my name in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest. Maybe it was the acoustics of the clearing, some strange echo effect that amplified the wind and shaped it into something resembling speech. Maybe it was animals, some nocturnal creature with an unusual call that sounded eerily human-like. Maybe, just maybe, I was losing my mind. The divorce, the stress, the isolation. Maybe it was all finally catching up to me. But even as I formulated these flimsy explanations, the whispers continued, growing bolder, more insistent. They started to anticipate my actions, responding to my thoughts, weaving themselves into the fabric of my consciousness. He'd think of turning to the right, and the whisper would seem to come from the right. I'd glance towards the creek, and the voice would drift from the direction of the water. It was as if the forest itself was listening, watching, responding to my every move, my every thought. The tone of the whispers began to shift, subtly at first, then more noticeably. The initial soft, breathy sibilance morphed into something more demanding, more urgent. The voice was no longer just curious, no longer just calling my name. It was insistent. Ethan, stay, Ethan, don't go. A cold knot of fear coiled in my stomach, tightening with each repetition of my name. The whispers were no longer seductive, no longer curious. They were possessive. They wanted something. They wanted me. Panic began to bubble up, threatening to overwhelm me. I had to get out of there. I had to leave this place, this clearing, this forest that seemed to be listening, watching, whispering my name. I started to pack up my camp, my movements jerky and frantic, driven by a desperate need to escape. I doused the fire with water, the hiss of steam echoing in the sudden silence. I tore down the tent, stuffing it haphazardly into its bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the zippers. I loaded everything into the truck, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes darting nervously into the darkness, expecting to see something. But there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, the whispering wind. Or so it seemed. As I climbed into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, the whispers intensified, no longer faint and distant, but loud, clear, surrounding me. Ethan, don't leave, Ethan, stay here. They seemed to be coming from inside the truck now, filling the cab, pressing in on me, suffocating me. I started the engine, the roar of the V8 momentarily drowning out the whispers. Relief flooded through me, fragile, fleeting. Just get on the road, I told myself. Just get moving, get away from this place. I put the truck in gear and started to pull forward, back the way I'd come in. But the road wasn't there. Or rather it was, but it was blocked, completely, utterly blocked. A wall of fog had risen up, thicker than anything I'd seen before. An impenetrable white curtain that stretched from tree to tree, from ground to sky. It was solid, absolute, as if the forest itself had exhaled a barrier, sealing me in. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just feet from the fog bank. Fear, raw and visceral, clawed at my throat. This wasn't natural fog. This was something else, something intentional. The whispers intensified. Now a chorus, a cacophony of voices, all calling my name, all demanding, pleading, threatening. Ethan, don't go, Ethan. You can't leave, Ethan. Stay with us. Desperation surged, a cold electric current. I had to do something. I couldn't stay here trapped, surrounded by these things. Who are you? I screamed into the darkness, my voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. What do you want from me? The whispers faltered, then coalesced, merging into a single voice. deeper now, colder, chillingly clear. "We want to keep you here, Ethan," the voice echoed around the clearing, resonating in my bones, stealing the air from my lungs. "You belong here, Ethan, with us forever." Then, in the periphery of my vision, among the hemlock trees that ring the clearing, the shadows moved. Not the playful dance of firelight, but a purposeful, deliberate shifting, a coalescing and dissolving of darkness, scatolacaniform, indistinct at first, then slowly, agonizingly, taking on a semblance of form, of entity. Shadows elongated, stretched, twisted, pulling themselves free from the trunks of the hemlocks, solidifying into figures that defied description, that twisted the very fabric of reality. They were tall, impossibly tall, their forms elongated and distorted, shifting and swirling like smoke given shape. They moved with a fluid, unsettling grace, gliding through the underbrush without disturbing a single leaf. And in the center of each shadowy form, points of light appeared cold and distant, like stars in a void, watching me with an ancient, unknowable hunger. Terror, pure and unadulterated, threatened to consume me. This was it. This was the end. I was trapped, surrounded, facing something that wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything I could comprehend. But beneath the terror, something else flickered, a spark of defiance, a stubborn refusal to surrender. I was Ethan Hayes, I was a survivor, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Rage, hot and sudden, replaced the fear. "What are you?" I roared, my voice echoing through the clearing, challenging the shadows, defying the whispers. "Show yourselves. Come out and face me." The shadowy figures paused, their movements faltering for a moment, as if startled by my defiance. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, a vortex of sound. "Stay, Ethan, stay with us." Don't fight it, but I was done listening. I was done running. I was going to fight. My eyes fell on the fire pit, the pile of half-burnt wood, the embers still glowing faintly beneath the ash. An idea, desperate, reckless, but suddenly, brilliantly clear, sparked in my mind. Fire, light. They were creatures of shadow, of darkness. They wouldn't like the light. I scrambled to the fire pit, grabbing armfuls of dry kindling and branches, feeding the dying embers, blowing on them, coaxing them back to life. The flames sputtered, then caught, licking at the dry wood, growing stronger, taller, pushing back the encroaching darkness. As the bonfire roared to life, casting a warm, flickering glow across the clearing, the shadowy figures recoiled, their forms dissolving slightly, the points of light dimming. The whispers faltered, then receded, their voices losing their power, their insistence. Fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope, I piled more wood onto the fire, creating a blazing inferno that crackled and roared, sending sparks spiraling up into the pre-dawn sky. The heat pushed back the fog, the light pushed back the shadows, and the voice fell silent. In the flickering light of the bonfire, the clearing seemed to breathe again, to return to a semblance of normalcy. The trees no longer leaned in, the shadows no longer moved with purpose, and the silence, though still profound, no longer felt oppressive. Dawn was still hours away, but the first hint of gray was starting to bleed into the eastern sky. It was enough. I didn't waste another moment. With trembling hands, I packed up the remnants of my camp, throwing everything into the truck. Leaving behind the tent, the fire pit, the whispers, the shadows, everything. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I drove down the forest road, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees, I knew I was leaving more than just a campsite behind. I was leaving a part of myself, a part that had been touched by something ancient, something otherworldly, something that would forever haunt the edges of my perception. I fled the Allegheny National Forest in the pre-dawn light, leaving behind the whispers and the hemlocks, but knowing, with a chilling certainty, that they would never truly leave me. The forest had held more than just natural sounds. It had held something else, and it had called my name. It wasn't a lack of noise. Not precisely. That first snagged my attention. It was a Thursday early autumn, creeping into West Virginia. The kind of day Blackwater Falls State Park usually hummed with the tail end of the summer crowds. But as I patrolled the High Falls Trail, a loop I knew like the back of my calloused hand, A different kind of quiet settled in. M. Ben Carter, Park Ranger badge. Number 3114, and for the last 10 years, this park had been my life, my sanctuary. I knew every rustle of leaf, every bird call, every shift in the wind that whispered through the hemlocks. This wasn't the quiet of a still afternoon, this was something else. Something hollowed out. The usual symphony of the woods, the distant rush of Blackwater Falls itself, the chatter of squirrels, the lazy drone of insects. It was all muted, as if someone had thrown a sound-dampening blanket over the entire section of the trail. At first, I chalked it up to my own head. Maybe I was just tired. Patrols had been heavier lately, late summer stragglers and early leaf peepers keeping us stretched thin. But the quiet persisted, deepening with every step I took further along the trail. It wasn't just quiet, it was still. No bird song, no squirrel scolding me from a branch, not even the persistent buzz of flies around the damp earth after the morning dew. Just nothing. I stopped, scanning the dense undergrowth, the towering trees, the path ahead. Everything looked normal, sunlight dappling through the canopy, leaves turning that vibrant, heartbreaking autumn gold. But the soundscape was gone, replaced by this oppressive, unnatural stillness. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Carter," I said, keying my radio. My voice sounded too loud, too intrusive in the vacuum of sound. Checking in from High Falls Trail, just doing a routine patrol. Static answered me, a crackling hiss that wasn't the usual radio interference of the deep woods. "Dispatch, do you read?" I tried again, adjusting the antenna, checking the frequency dial. Nothing but static, a pulsing, agitated white noise that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Frustrated, I clipped the radio back onto my belt. Equipment malfunction, probably. Happened all the time in the rugged terrain of Blackwater Falls. But even as I told myself that, a knot of unease tightened in my gut. It wasn't just the radio. It was the silence. I pushed further into the woods, the High Falls Trail winding along the ridge, offering glimpses of the Blackwater River far below. Usually from here, you could hear the roar of the falls, a constant, thundering presence that grounded you, reminded you of the park's raw power. Today, nothing. Just stillness. And it wasn't just sound. I noticed it then, the absence of movement. No squirrels darting across the path, no deer flicking their white tails in the distance, no chipmunks scattering at my approach. So the woods were empty, devoid of the usual bustling life. I veered off the trail, pushing through a thicket of rhododendron, heading deeper into the silent zone. I needed to see something, anything that would explain this. Maybe a landslide had scared off the wildlife. Maybe some localized atmospheric phenomenon was dampening the sound. Anything but this. The stillness intensified as I moved further from the trail, pressing down on me like a physical weight. So my ears started to ring, a high-pitched whine that seemed to amplify the unnatural quiet around me. The air itself felt thicker, heavier, as if it were resisting my passage. I found a deer trail, faint but discernible, usually crisscrossed with fresh tracks. Today, nothing. Just smooth, undisturbed earth covered in a pristine layer of fallen leaves. It was like walking through a diorama, a meticulously crafted scene devoid of life. "Dispatch, this is Carter again." I tried the radio even though I knew it was useless. The static answered, louder now, pulsing with a strange rhythmic intensity. Close to the stillness, the radio was worse, not better. That didn't make any sense. I pushed on the silence, now a tangible presence, pressing against my eardrums, making my head ache. The vegetation started to change. Leaves that should have been vibrant autumn colors were muted, almost faded, as if leached of their vibrancy. Ferns that should have been lush and green were withered, brittle, their edges curling inwards. It wasn't just quiet, it was draining. Life itself seemed to be receding, pulling back from this section of the park in the silence. That oppressive, unnatural stillness, it was spreading. Shoptang Carter, emergency situation. Possible anomaly, High Falls Trail. I choked out, my voice strained, my throat suddenly dry. The radio screamed static, a furious, chaotic burst that made me flinch. I ripped the device from my belt, tossing it onto the forest floor in disgust. Useless piece of junk. Or was it the woods themselves that were interfering? The stillness, whatever it was, seemed to be anti-technology. It was suffocating sound, and now, it seemed, interfering with radio waves. a wave of dizziness hit me, sudden and disorienting. I stumbled, catching myself on the trunk of a gnarled oak, my vision swimming for a moment. Nausea churned in my stomach, a cold, clammy dread that had nothing to do with altitude sickness. This was something else, something deeper, a primal fear resonating in my bones. The oppressive stillness, the withered vegetation, the absence of life. It was all converging into a picture of something profoundly wrong. "Dispatch, Carter, do you read?" I heard my own voice, thin and reedy, barely audible even to myself. I was talking to silence, to the void, to whatever this thing was that had stolen a life from these woods. "Dispatch, can anyone hear me?" I pleaded, my voice cracking now, the carefully constructed facade of ranger professionalism starting to crumble. Only static answered, a mocking, pulsing hiss that seemed to laugh at my desperation. I stumbled onward, deeper into the silent zone, driven by a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand what was happening, even as every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee, to escape this terrifying, soundless place. And then I found them. Animal carcasses, scattered amidst the withered ferns and muted leaves. A rabbit, a squirrel, a bird, woodland creatures, small things but normally abundant in this part of the park. Now just still. They weren't decayed, not in the usual sense. There was no stench of rot, no swarm of flies. Instead, they were desiccated, drained of color, like old photographs faded by the sun. Their fur was dull, their eyes empty sockets, their flesh leathery and stiff. I knelt beside the rabbit, its small form unnaturally light as I picked it up. It felt hollow, devoid of substance, like a dried husk. The color was gone, leached away, leaving behind a muted, grayscale version of life. It wasn't just dead, it was enlived. The silence pressed in, heavier than ever, seeping into my mind, a cold, empty void that mirrored the deadness in my hands. My thoughts started to slow, becoming sluggish, like wading through thick mud. Emotions seemed to flatten, to fade, replaced by a growing sense of nothingness. It wasn't just the forest being drained, it was me. The stillness wasn't just outside, it was getting inside, creeping into my thoughts, my feelings, my very being. The oppressive dread intensified, morphing into a terrifying, soul-deep hopelessness. I was being emptied out, hollowed out, just like the creatures around me. I was trapped, deep within the silent zone, surrounded by withered life and oppressive nothingness. The trees, once comforting sentinels, now seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. The silence, once just unsettling, was now malevolent. An active force, draining the world, draining me. I looked around, desperately searching for something. An escape route, a sign of life, anything to break the suffocating stillness. But there was only the forest, muted, withered, dead. And the silence, vast and empty, growing louder in my ears, filling my mind, consuming me. This wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of everything. The absence of life, of energy, of hope. It was a void, an unseen emptiness at the heart of the woods. And it was expanding, swallowing everything in its path. And now it was swallowing me. My senses started to dim, the edges of my vision blurring. The cold was seeping into my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was the cold of nothingness, the chill of the void. My will to resist, to fight, to even care was fading, dissolving into the oppressive stillness that surrounded me. I was losing myself, becoming part of the void. And in that moment of utter despair, a primal instinct, buried deep within my DNA, flared to life. Survival. A spark of defiance against the encroaching nothingness. My hand, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the emergency beacon clipped to my belt. It was a last resort, a signal for help, a desperate plea to the world outside this silent, dying place. With my last ounce of strength, I activated it, pressing the button, holding it down, willing the signal to break through the stillness, to reach someone, anyone. A faint red light blinked on the beacon, a tiny spark of defiance in the overwhelming darkness. I clung to it, that small, flickering light, as if it were the last vestige of life in a world being consumed by nothingness. Then everything went black. I woke to the sound of voices, distant and muffled, like echoes from another world. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh glare of something artificial. Not the soft, dappled sunlight of the forest. Fluorescent lights, white walls, the sterile smell of antiseptic. I was in a hospital. Faces swam into focus above me, paramedics. Their faces grim, their movements efficient. "He's awake," one of them said, his voice sounding strangely loud after the silence. "Where?" I croaked, my voice raspy, unused. "You're safe, Ranger," another paramedic said, his tone reassuring but strained. "We got your beacon, pulled you out of a bad spot." Bad spot, understatement of the year. They didn't know, couldn't know, what I had faced in that silence. They had pulled me from the edge of nothingness, dragged me back from the void. Physically, I recovered. The doctors ran tests, found signs of dehydration and exposure, but nothing anomalous. They chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, a mild panic attack. They didn't understand the true panic, the soul-deep terror of the stillness. The park area around High Falls Trail remained closed, officially for environmental assessment. The authorities were vague, dismissive, unwilling to acknowledge anything beyond unusual ecological disturbances. But I knew better. The silence lingered, a permanent stain on that section of the park. Wildlife avoided it. Rangers reported equipment malfunctions, strange readings, an oppressive sense of dread when they ventured too close. I went back to work, back to patrols, back to the routine of park life. But the silence followed me, not physically, but inside. It echoed in my thoughts, in my dreams, in the hollow spaces between sounds. Blackwater Falls State Park, once my sanctuary, was now a constant reminder of the void I had encountered, the nothingness that lurked just beneath the surface of the natural world. The silence lingers still, a constant companion, a chilling reminder of the day the stillness almost swallowed me whole. And sometimes when the park is quiet, too quiet, and the wind whispers through the trees in a way that sounds almost like Lothor, I can feel it. That oppressive dread, that soul-deep fear, creeping back into my bones. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core, that the void is still out there, waiting, watching, in the stillness at Blackwater Falls. It started with the silence. You don't notice silence until it's a thing, until it presses in, heavy, like the fog that often rolls across the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I come for the quiet, of course. That was the whole damn point. Escape the echoes in my own head, the ones that sounded like her laughter, her voice, her everything. Sarah, gone. Pancreatic cancer ripped her away faster than a leaf in a hurricane, leaving me adrift. The trail was supposed to be my anchor, the physical pain a counterweight to the hollow ache in my chest. I'd hiked sections of the AT before, but never alone. Never like this. So this was different. This waspinance, or maybe pilgrimage. How, I didn't know, I just walked. The first day was a blur of green and brown, the rhythm of my boots on the packed earth, the burn in my thighs, the sweat stinging my eyes. It was good, that burn. Felt real. Felt like something other than the ice in my veins. I made decent mileage, found a sheltered spot near a rocky outcrop, pitched my lightweight tent, ate a cold meal of jerky and trail mix, and slept, fitfully, but slept. Lee, too, was more of the same. The endless green tunnel of trees, the sun dappling through the leaves, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Peaceful in a way, the kind of peace that comes from exhaustion, from pushing yourself to the edge of what you can endure. I was starting to feel it, the quiet seeping into my bones, the sharp edges of my grief softening, just a little. And then I saw it. Just off the trail, nestled amongst the fallen leaves and pine needles, something white. At first I thought it was a small stone, bleached by the sun, but as I got closer the shape became clearer, more defined. It was a tooth. Human, I realized with a jolt, and too damn big to be a deer's incisor. A molar maybe, or a premolar. I wasn't a dentist, but I knew teeth. Everyone did? I stared at it, brow furrowed, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had lost it. Some kid hiking with their family. A loose tooth finally giving way on the trail. Yeah, that had to be it. Just a fluke. A weird, unsettling fluke, but a fluke nonetheless. I nudged it with the toe of my boot, then kept walking, the image of that stark white object lingering in my mind. A few hours later, I found another one. This one was closer to the trail, practically right in the middle of it. Another tooth, just as white, just as human. Okay, that was weird. 2 teeth, so close together. On a remote section of the Appalachian Trail, the kid with the loose tooth must have had a whole damn mouthful falling out. I picked this one up, turning it over in my fingers. It was clean, smooth, almost polished. No dirt clinging to it, like it had been cleaned. Or placed. I shivered despite the warm sun, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. I dropped the tooth back onto the trail, a sudden urge to get away from it, to leave it behind. But then morbid curiosity. That dark, irresistible pull took hold. I started looking. Scanning the trail ahead, my eyes no longer on the beauty of the forest, but on the ground. Searching for more white specks against the brown and green, and I found them. Not right away, not clustered together, but scattered. Like breadcrumbs. A trail of teeth, leading off the main path. Into the woods deeper, the unease turned to something sharper then, a cold dread that settled in my stomach. This wasn't kids losing teeth. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Deliberate. Someone or something was leaving these teeth. For what? To mark a path? To lure someone? I hesitated at the edge of the trail, the woods beyond dark and dense, the sunlight barely penetrating the thick canopy. The teeth led that way, away from the safety of the marked path, into the unknown, into the silence that felt less like peace, now more like waiting. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, to ignore it, to chalk it up to some bizarre coincidence and keep hiking. But the morbid curiosity was stronger. The need to know. The dark, twisted fascination with the macabre. I took a deep breath, the forest air suddenly feeling heavy, oppressive, and I stepped off the trail. The woods closed in around me, the sunlight fading almost instantly. The air grew colder, damper. The silence intensified, swallowing even the sound of my own breathing. The trail of teeth continued, scattered but discernible, guiding me deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The teeth started to change. They weren't as clean now, no longer polished white. They were fresher. Some had flecks of dried blood clinging to them, dark brown against the ivory enamel. Others had bits of tissue still attached, ragged edges of pink and red. My stomach churned. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't some twisted prank. This was real. Violent, disturbing in a way that went beyond the macabre into something. The trail of teeth led me to a clearing, a small, overgrown space choked with weeds and fallen branches. It was here that I found the evidence of a struggle. Broken branches snapped clean off at unnatural angles. Disturbed earth, churned up and muddy, even though it hadn't rained in days. A scattering of personal items, a ripped piece of fabric that looked like it might have been from a hiking jacket. A crushed water bottle, a single muddy hiking boot. And more teeth. Dozens of them, scattered across the clearing like fallen leaves. Some were whole, others broken. Fragments of enamel and root mixed with dirt and dried blood. The smell hit me then, faint but unmistakable, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the earthy scent of decay. This wasn't just a struggle. This was a massacre, or the aftermath of one. This clearing, it was a killing ground. The trail of teeth led onward, away from the clearing. But I didn't follow it, not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what had happened here. I searched the clearing, my senses on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig making me jump. I found more items, a crumpled map torn and stained, a half-eaten energy bar, a discarded lighter. And then, tucked under a fallen log, I found the camp, or what was left of it. A makeshift shelter crudely constructed from branches and a tattered tarp. Ransacked, torn apart. Sleeping bags ripped open, their stuffing scattered across the ground like feathers. Cooking equipment smashed, dented, unusable. Food supplies scattered, spilled, trampled, and signs of violence. More blood. Dark stains on the tarp, on the ground, on the branches of the shelter. Scratches, gouges, deep rents in the wood. This wasn't just abandoned. This was attacked. I realized then, with a sickening lurch in my gut, what this camp probably was. Missing hikers. The ones you heard about on the news, the vague reports, the official statements about venturing off-trail, about the dangers of the wilderness. They hadn't just gotten lost. They hadn't just had an accident. They'd be taken. By what? By whom? The forest held its breath around me, the silence pressing in again heavier than ever. And then I felt it, eyes watching me. From the trees, from the shadows, from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, heart hammering, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife I carried on my belt. Nothing, just trees, shadows. Fog starting to roll in again, thick and cold. But the feeling persisted, watched, hunted. Like I was no longer the observer but the observed, to the prey, and then I heard it. Movement. In the woods around me, just out of sight, too quiet to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Footsteps, soft padded footsteps moving through the undergrowth, matching my pace. Following me, the footsteps stopped when I stopped, started again when I moved. Always just out of sight, always just out of hearing, but always there. A constant chilling presence in the silent woods. I started to walk slowly at first, then faster, then almost running. The footsteps kept pace, but whatever was out there, it was playing with me. Toying with me, letting me know it was there. Letting me know it was there, letting me know I was being watched. But refusing to show itself, paranoia, raw and visceral, clawed at my mind. Something else entirely, the teeth, the camp, the violence. It all pointed to something monstrous, something predatory, something human, but twisted. I reached the trail of teeth again, the scattered white objects gleaming faintly in the fading light. And then right there in the middle of the trail, directly in my path, I saw it. The final tooth. Unlike the others, this one wasn't old or weathered or blood-stained. It was fresh, still wet with blood, and tissue, pink and raw, clinging to the root. It had been pulled recently, very recently, and it hadn't just been dropped, it had been placed, deliberately, on a flat rock right in the center of the trail like an offering, or a warning. That's when the ambush came. Not a roar, not a scream, not even a sound, just sudden, brutal force. Something slammed into me from the side, knocking me off my feet, sending me sprawling onto the leaf-strewn ground. The air exploded from my lungs, my head cracked against a rock, and for a moment, everything went black. Then pain. Sharp, searing pain in my leg, like fire, like tearing metal. I gasped, struggling to sit up, my vision blurry, my head swimming. And then I saw it, above me, leaning over me, a shape in the fading light, too tall, too broad, too wrong. Human, yes, in a way, but distorted, twisted, monstrous. I couldn't make out features, not clearly, just bully shadow. Something massive and dark blocking out the last of the sunlight. And then the smell hit me, a stench that made me gag, a mixture of sweat and blood, and something else, something animal. Feral, unclean. A hand reached down, not a hand, not really. Long fingers, too long, ending in points that weren't quite claws, but close. They closed around my arm, vise-like, crushing bone. Pain exploded again, white-hot, blinding. Rage surged through me then, a primal fury that burned through the fear. This thing, this monster, it wasn't going to take me. Not without a fight. I thrashed, kicking out with my good leg, my hand fumbling for the knife on my belt. The blade was small, insignificant against something this size, but it was all I had. My foot connected with something solid, meaty, and the thing grunted, a low guttural sound that vibrated through the ground. Its grip on my arm loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I scrambled back, away from the bulk, away from the shadow, drawing the knife, the small silver blade gleaming faintly in the twilight. The thing lunged, fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. It was on me in an instant, its weight crashing down, pinning me to the ground again. I twisted, trying to avoid its bulk, the air thick with that foul stench. I saw it then, finally, in that desperate adrenaline-fueled moment, a glimpse of its face, or what passed for a face. A mask of flesh and shadow, too long, too narrow, with features that seemed to shift and melt and reform. And the eyes. Those black, depthless eyes, burning with a hunger that went beyond physical, a hunger that seemed to devour the very light around them. It roared then, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, but something in between, something wrong. It lunged for my throat, those long fingers reaching, tearing. I didn't think, I just reacted. Adrenaline, fear, rage, all coalescing into a single point of desperate action. I thrust the knife upward, blindly, wildly, aiming for anything. The blade met resistance, something soft, yielding, then something harder, bone or cartilage. The thing howled, a sound of pure animalistic pain, and recoiled, stumbling back, its weight lifting off me. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline screaming in my ears, my leg throbbing, my arm screaming. The thing stood there swaying, its shadow form shifting and distorting in the fading light. Blood, dark and viscous, oozed from a wound in its chest. Shoulder. I couldn't tell. Anatomy didn't seem to apply to this thing. It turned, slowly, deliberately, those black eyes fixed on me for one last chilling moment. Then, with another of those wet, splitting sounds, it retreated. Melted back into the woods. Vanished into the darkness. I stood there, shaking. Knife clutched in my hand, listening to the sounds of its retreat fading into the silence of the forest. Silence again, but different now. Heavy with the weight of what I just experienced. Heavy with the knowledge that I wasn't alone in these woods, that I had been hunted. That I had survived. Barely my leg was a mess, blood soaking through my jeans, the pain throbbing, insistent. My arm was numb, probably broken. My head throbbed from the fall, but I was alive. For now, I fumbled for my emergency beacon, my fingers clumsy, numb with cold and fear. It took me several tries, my hand shaking so badly I could barely press the button. Finally, the red light blinked on, a tiny spark of hope in the vast, indifferent darkness. Help was coming. Eventually, but until then, I was still alone. In the woods, with the silence. And the shadows, and the lingering, chilling certainty that whatever ID fought, whatever E be wounded, was still out there watching, waiting. And maybe laughing that soft, high, inhuman laugh in the darkness. They found me just before dawn, cold, bleeding, barely conscious. The rescue team, rangers, paramedics, the flashing lights of their vehicles cutting through the fog like beacons of salvation. They carried me out of the woods, wrapped in blankets, pumped full of painkillers, their voices a distant murmur in the fog of my pain and exhaustion. I was rescued, I was safe. But the forest kept its secrets. The stalker, the thing Nixit, was never found. The trail of teeth, the abandoned camp, the signs of violente became just another unsolved mystery in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. A chilling testament to the darkness that lurks, not just within the woods, but within humanity itself. A darkness I had glimpsed, however briefly, and knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, would never truly leave me. The air up here, it's different. Thinner, cleaner, sharper. You breathe it in, and it feels like it could cut you from the inside out. But in a good way, you know? That's what I kept telling myself anyway. Staring out at the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest stretching out below me like some endless green ocean. I'm Daniel Bellamy. Danny to most. And for the next 6 months, this fire lookout tower perched on Obsidian Peak was going to be my home. Dispatch crackled to life on the radio, snapping me out of my thoughts. Lookout 72. This is Gifford-Pinchot Dispatch radio check, over. I grabbed the mic, my voice echoing a little in the small tower cabin. Dispatch, Lookout 72, loud and clear, 5x5, over. Roger that, 72. Readings are clear across the sector. Low fire risk today, but keep your eyes peeled, winds picking up. Routine weather update in an hour, over 10-4 dispatch. Lookout 72, out. I set the mic back down, a smile playing on my lips. Everything was perfect, the view was breathtaking. Miles and miles of dense forest, the kind that swallowed up sunlight even at midday. The solitude was exactly what I craved, a world away from the noise and clutter of Seattle, where I'd been bouncing between dead-end jobs and crowded apartments. Fire lookout, that was the ticket. Peace, quiet, and a paycheck. What more could a guy ask for? The first few weeks were idyllic. Days melted into each other in a rhythm of sunrises and sunsets. Radio checks and weather reports, the occasional hawk circling overhead. I hiked the perimeter around the tower, familiarizing myself with the terrain, learning the names of the peaks and valleys, feeling myself become a part of this vast, ancient landscape. Evenings were spent reading, sketching, and sometimes just staring out at the endless woods, letting the silence seep into my bones. Then the fog started. It wasn't unusual for fog to roll in, especially at higher elevations, but this was different. It wasn't the soft, wispy kind that drifted gently through the trees. This fog was thick, almost viscous, rolling in with unnatural speed, blanketing the forest floor in a matter of minutes. 1 minute, you'd be enjoying a clear view down the ridge. The next, everything below the tower platform would be swallowed by a white, suffocating blanket. Dispatch Lookout 72. Weather update request over. I spoke into the mic, the sudden change unsettling me more than I wanted to admit. Dispatch voice, usually calm and steady, had a slight edge to it. Lookout 72. Dispatch weather advisory just came through. Dense fog advisory in effect for your sector. Visibility near zero and lower elevations. No significant precipitation expected, but temperatures are dropping rapidly. Advise caution for any ground-based personnel, over. Roger that, dispatch. Lookout 72, out. I frowned, staring out at the swirling white mass below. Rapid temperature drop. Dense fog, it felt off. The forecast hadn't predicted anything like this. That's when the radio interference started. At first, it was just a faint crackle in the background of dispatch's transmissions, easily dismissed as atmospheric static. But it grew steadily worse, a constant hiss and pop that made it hard to hear clearly. Lookout 72. Routine check visibility report over. Dispatch's voice was now battling against a rising tide of static. Dispatch Lookout 72. Visibility limited. Dense fog, ground level obscured. Interference increasing, requesting equipment check, over. I strained to hear the reply, the static almost drowning out the words. 72 dispatch. Equipment readings are nominal at our end. Possible atmospheric conditions causing localized interference. Monitor closely, advise if interference worsens, over. 10-4 dispatch. I signed off, fiddling with the radio dials, trying to clear the static. But it was no use. The interference was getting stronger, becoming rhythmic, pulsing, like a heartbeat gone wrong. It wasn't just static anymore, there was something else layered beneath it. A low, garbled hum that vibrated through the tower's metal frame. Through my binoculars, I started noticing other things that didn't fit. Wildlife, usually abundant in these woods, had vanished. The constant chorus of birdsong that had been my morning soundtrack was gone, replaced by an unnatural silence. Then, through a break in the fog, I saw a stampede. Not of deer or elk, the usual forest inhabitants, but of everything. Rabbits, squirrels, birds taking flight in panic swarms, all fleeing downhill away from something unseen, unheard, but clearly terrifying. Dispatch Lookout 72. Priority transmission, possible unusual wildlife activity in Sector 4, over. My voice was tight, my hand gripping the mic harder than necessary. Dispatch's response was quicker this time, sharper. 72 dispatch. Unusual wildlife activity. Elaborate, over, dispatch. 72. Largest scale animal exodus heading downhill. Sector 4. No apparent cause, weather conditions, foggy, static, intensifying, over. Differ, 72, dispatch, confirm no visible fire threat. Sector 4, over, negative. Dispatch, no fire threat visible, but something is spooking them. Interference is rhythmic now, pulsing. Almost organic, over. I hesitated, the word feeling foolish even to my own ears. Organic? What did that even mean? The radio crackled, and dispatch's voice, though still trying to maintain composure, was edged with concern. 72 dispatch. Standby 1 checking for seismic activity. Or other unusual reports in your sector. Over. While I waited, I kept scanning the forest below, my binoculars trembling slightly in my hands. The fog was swirling, thick and white, obscuring everything, but through the shifting layers, I caught glimpses, fleeting impressions that made my blood run cold. Shapes, impossibly large, indistinct shapes moving through the fog. Too fast, too fluid, not like any natural animal. And the radio interference, it was synced to their movement, pulsing faster as the shapes seemed to draw closer, the garbled hum growing louder, deeper, resonating in my chest. Dispatch came back on, the static now a near constant roar. Lookout 72, dispatch. Negative on seismic activity. No other reports of unusual phenomena in your sector. Your equipment readings are still nominal, but your transmissions are degrading rapidly. Can you confirm tower stability over? Dispatch 72. Tower, seems stable, but the interference its transmissions are becoming difficult, and there's something moving down there. Big, too big, and fast over. My voice was shaking now. I couldn't hide it anymore. 72, dispatch. Confirm visual contact with, what are you observing over? Dispatch was starting to sound frantic, the carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my heart hammering against my ribs. Schaffen 72. Visual, obscured by fog, but shapes. Large shapes moving through the fog. Impossible size. Impossible movement. Interference is overwhelming, and the sounds they're changing over. The sounds. I hadn't even described the sounds. Beneath the rhythmic static, beneath the garbled hum, something else was emerging. Weaving its way into the radio waves, a chorus of voices. Distorted, fragmented. Whispers and screams, laughter and sobs, all jumbled together, unintelligible but undeniably human, undeniably terrified. 72, dispatch. Repeat last transmission. Experiencing extreme signal degradation. Confirm nature of visual over. Dispatch voice was almost completely lost now, battling against a cacophony of noise that seemed to be emanating from the radio itself. I keyed the mic again, my hand trembling so badly I could barely hold it steady. Dispatched Lookout 72, I don't know what it is. It's in the fog. Moving closer. The radio, its voices, screams, help me please over. The last word dissolved into a burst of static that filled the tower cabin, deafening, agonizing. Silence. Then the crescendo, the radio erupted. Not just static anymore, but a symphony of chaos. Screams, not just snippets now, but full-throated, agonized cries, mixed with laughter. That same high, thin, childish giggle I'd heard on the slope. But multiplied, distorted. Echoing, layered upon itself until it became something monstrous. The garbled hum deepened into a low thrumming that I could feel in my bones, vibrating through the metal floor of the tower, shaking the whole structure. Below, through the thinning fog, it came. It wasn't just shapes anymore, it was form. Vast, amorphous, constantly shifting and distorting, like a living oil slick swallowing light instead of reflecting it. It was too big, too wrong, its edges blurring into the fog. Its center a swirling vortex of darkness. Thuv light flickered within it, not stars, not eyes, but something else, something cold and alien, that pulsed with the rhythmic static that now consumed the radio waves. Shepson's voice, or what was left of it, fought its way through the chaotic noise, a desperate, panicked plea. Lookout 72, dispatch Bellamy. Report, what is happening? Tower readings are going haywire. Respond, damn it, respond. The entity reached the base of the tower. I saw it clearly now, or as clearly as my sanity would allow. It wasn't just one thing, but many coalescing, merging, separating, a living tapestry of impossible geometries and shifting shadows. It seemed to absorb the very light around it. The fog thinning, not because it was dissipating, but because it was being consumed. Drawn into the thing's vast, unknowable form. The tower shook. Violently, not from wind, not from tremors, but from something pressing against it. Something heavy, something intentional. The metal frame groaned, the guy wires straining. The whole structure swaying precariously. I grabbed the mic, my voice a strangled whisper. My words lost in the storm of noise that had become my world. Dispatch, it's here at the tower, I see it. God help me, the radio shrieked. A final, ear-splitting burst of static that consumed everything. Then silence. Weeks later, when the Forest Service finally sent a team to investigate, they found the tower abandoned. The door was bolted from the inside, the windows shattered, the radio equipment ripped from its moorings and thrown across the cabin. Danny Bellamy was gone, vanished without a trace. The only evidence they found was his logbook. Open on the desk, the last entry scrawled in increasingly frantic handwriting, filled with words like fog, shapes, voices, watching, open, waiting. And the radio. The old tube radio, still crackling faintly with static, still broadcasting those garbled voices, those distant screams, that endless rhythmic hum. They called it equipment malfunction, atmospheric interference, stress-induced hallucination. They closed the tower, sealed off the trail, and marked the area as off-limits due to environmental hazards. But in the small towns around Gifford-Pinchot, another story began to circulate, whispered in hushed tones in diners and bars, passed down like a chilling campfire tale. The story of Lookout 72, of Danny Bellamy, the rookie fire lookout who saw something he shouldn't have seen, heard something he shouldn't have heard, and transmitted his terror into the airwaves. A final, desperate warning from the wilderness. The fire lookout's last transmission. They say if you tune your radio to the right frequency late at night, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, you can still hear it. Just static at first. Then the garbled voices, the rhythmic hum. And if you listen closely, if you listen very closely, you can almost hear the screams. A warning from the wilderness. Carried on the wind, a chilling echo of something vast, unknowable, and still out there, waiting in the fog. Do you ever get that feeling? The one where a place you loved as a kid just isn't right anymore. Not in a dramatic haunted house kind of way, but subtle, like a note slightly off-key, a color just a shade too dark. That's what Pisgah felt like pulling back into that old clearing after all these years. But it should have been perfect. A postcard of nostalgia, the same towering pines casting long shadows, the same whisper of the creek down below, the same fire pit ringed with stones we'd dragged there as kids. But it wasn't. Something had shifted. We were all there, the old crew, me, Liam Walker, back in my mid-20s, trying to recapture something that probably only existed in my head, Sarah. Always the pragmatist, her brow furrowed even before we'd fully unpacked Bem, a quiet observer, his gaze already drifting into the deeper woods, like he was searching for something, and Chloe, our spark, usually bubbling with energy. Now subdued, her smile a little too tight. Childhood friends drawn back to our childhood haunt. We'd talked about this for months. A reunion, a pilgrimage to the place where we'd built forts, told ghost stories, and swore we'd be friends forever. Pisgah National Forest. It was supposed to be a reset button, a way to reconnect with each other, with ourselves. Instead, it felt like walking onto a stage where the play had already started, and we were all missing the script. The first thing I noticed, and maybe we all did, even if we didn't say it out loud, was the stillness. Pisgah was never silent, not really. There was always the wind sighing through the pines, the rush of water, the distant chatter of birds. But here in our clearing, it was muted, muffled, like the forest itself was holding its breath. It wasn't alarming, not at first, just different. Unsettling in a way that pricked at the edges of your awareness. We started unpacking, setting up tents in the places we remembered, muscle memory guiding us through the familiar motions. As I was staking down my tent, I saw it. Just off the edge of the clearing, nestled beneath the roots of an ancient oak, a glove. Not just any glove, a kid's glove, small worn leather missing its mate. Odd, but not alarming. Kids lose gloves in the woods all the time. I picked it up thinking I'd toss it in the fire later, and that's when I saw the others. Scattered around the campsite, almost hidden in plain sight, were more things. A single muddy hiking boot, laces frayed, a plastic toy soldier half buried in pine needles, its paint chipped and faded. A tarnished silver locket lying open, its tiny photo slots empty. Lost things, collected things, arranged things. That's when the unease started to solidify. It was Chloe who really noticed, of course. Chloe with her uncanny memory for the smallest details. She picked up the toy soldier, turning it over in her fingers, her usual bright eyes clouding over with a strange mix of confusion and something else recognition. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. This looks like, remember that time, Liam, when we were kids and we came camping here with your dad? And I lost that Green Army man? The one with the bazooka?" I frowned, trying to dredge up a memory from 2 decades ago. "Vaguely, yeah, maybe." She turned the soldier over again, pointing to a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch on its plastic helmet. "This scratch, I think this is it, Liam, the one I lost." Here a chill ran down my spine, a prickle of something cold and inexplicable. But the way she said it, the certainty in her voice, it felt heavier than coincidence. Then Ben chimed in, his quiet voice cutting through the growing tension. He was kneeling by the fire pit, poking at something with a stick. "Guys, look at this." It was a shoe. Another single shoe, this one, a child's sneaker, bright blue, caked in mud. Ben turned it over and we all saw it, scrawled on the sole in faded marker. A name, Ben. My blood ran cold. Ben, his shoe. From when we were kids? Here? Lost and now found? And placed here? Was Sarah, ever the rational one, tried to dismiss it. Okay, this is weird, seriously weird. But it's probably just some kids, right? Playing a prank? Someone found these old things, thought it would be funny to leave them around? Her voice sounded forced even to my ears. We all knew it wasn't kids. This felt deliberate. Too deliberate. And the way they were arranged, not just scattered randomly, but almost displayed. Like someone had taken care, had purpose. That night the unease festered. We sat around the fire, the flames crackling and spitting. But the easy banter of earlier was gone, replaced by a strained silence. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. We kept glancing at the edges of the firelight, into the deepening shadows of the woods. The lost things were still there, just beyond the circle of warmth, watching us, or so it felt. It was Ben who noticed it next. The next morning he let out a sharp, choked gasp as he unzipped his tent. He was staring at something just outside his tent flap, something nestled amongst the roots of a sapling, a doll. Not a store-bought doll, plastic and manufactured. This was handmade, crudely stitched fabric, stuffed with something that looked like straw. Its face painted with uneven strokes of what might have been charcoal. And it resembled Ben. It was unsettlingly like him. The same lanky limbs, the same vaguely mournful expression painted on its fabric face. Even the same messy brown hair, clumsily stitched from yarn. Ben backed away from it, his face pale. What is that?" No one had an answer. We circled the doll cautiously, none of us wanting to touch it. It just sat there, propped against the tree roots, staring at us with its button eyes. A miniature fabric Ben, left as a gift. A threat, a joke gone horribly wrong. The item started moving then, subtly at first. The glove which ID left by the fire pit reappeared on the picnic table. The toy soldier which Chloe had placed on a log was now perched on top of Ben's tent. The doll seemed to shift position slightly throughout the day, its button eyes following us around the clearing. It was Sarah who found the note. She was repacking her backpack, getting ready for a short hike, when she pulled out her water bottle and something else slipped out with it. A small folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket where she swore she hadn't put it. She unfolded it slowly, her brow furrowed as she read. Then her eyes widened, a slow dawning of horror creeping into her face. She handed me the note, her hand trembling. It was written in a childish scrawl, uneven letters, almost like a child had printed them out. "You said you liked fireflies, Liam. Remember the jar?" My breath hitched in my throat. The jar. It was something Sarah and I had talked about years ago, on one of our first camping trips together. Long before Marcus and Ben, long before Chloe. A private conversation, whispered under the stars, about catching fireflies in a jar, about childhood dreams, about things that were lost and things that were found. How could anyone know that? How could anyone know that specific memory? The realization hit us all at once. A cold, sickening wave of understanding. Someone was watching us. Someone had been watching us, not just now, but always. Collecting not just lost objects, but memories. Information, pieces of us. The rustling started that afternoon. Faint sounds at first, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Leaves shifting, twigs snapping. We told ourselves it was squirrels, deer, the wind. But the rustling grew more insistent, more deliberate. Always just out of sight, always just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. Shadows flickered at the periphery of our vision, fleeting glimpses of movement, shapes that resolved into nothing when we turned to look directly at them. We felt it then, the growing sense of being observed. manipulated, played with, like we were mice in some elaborate, terrifying game. And the rules were being written by someone, something unseen, unheard, but always watching. By the third day, the fear was a living thing, coiling in our stomachs, tightening our chests, making our skin crawl. We huddled together, clinging to the firelight, the small circle of warmth and illumination feeling, increasingly fragile against the encroaching darkness. We talked in hushed whispers, our voices barely audible over the crackling flames, our conversations circling back to the same questions, the same fears, the same unanswered mysteries. Who was doing this? What did they want, and how could we escape? Driven by a desperate need to understand, a reckless urge to confront the unseen horror that was toying with us, I made a decision. That night, while the others huddled around the fire, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, I slipped away. I told them I was just going to gather more firewood, a flimsy excuse that no one questioned, too consumed by their own terror to notice the lie. I walked into the woods following a trail of lost objects. Deliberately placed, I realized now. A child's mitten hanging from a low branch. A broken compass lying on a moss-covered log. A single playing card face down, its back faded and worn. Breadcrumbs leading me deeper and deeper. The trees closed in around me. The firelight fading behind, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The rustling started again, louder now, more insistent, no longer just at the periphery, but all around me, closing in. The whispers returned too, clearer now, almost welcoming, luring me onward. I walked for what felt like hours, the trail of lost objects guiding me through the ever-darkening woods. The ground sloped downward, the air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves intensified. Then, through the trees, I saw it. A clearing, larger than our campsite, almost perfectly circular, bathed in an unnatural moonlight that seemed to emanate from the clearing itself, and in the center, the collection. It was vast, sprawling, a hoard of lost things that defied comprehension. Mismatched gloves, single shoes, broken toys, rusted tools, tarnished jewelry, faded photographs, yellowed letters, keys, buttons, coins, trinkets, debris, memories, all meticulously organized, categorized, displayed. Rows upon rows of objects, stretching as far as I could see, into the fog-shrouded clearing, arranged in patterns that made no logical sense, yet felt intentional. And in the heart of it all, a figure, hunched, shrouded in shadows, almost invisible against the backdrop of this hoard. The collector. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. Just stood there, motionless, surrounded by his lost things, his treasures, his obsessions. I took a step closer, my heart hammering against my ribs, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" The figure slowly turned its head, a jerky, unnatural movement, like a puppet being manipulated by unseen strings. And then he spoke, his voice a raspy whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, like wind sighing through a hollow tree. "Lost," he whispered. "All lost. Forgotten." He gestured to the vast collection around him, a sweeping, possessive gesture. "I collect them, keep them safe, remember them." His voice was devoid of malice, devoid of threat, just a profound, aching sadness. He wasn't monstrous, not in the way I imagined. He was pathetic. A creature consumed by loss, by memory, by the desperate need to hold on to things that were gone, things that were forgotten. These belong to people," I said, my voice stronger now, the fear slowly giving way to a strange mix of pity and understanding. "These are memories. They're not meant to be collected. They're meant to be remembered." He tilted his head, his shrouded face turning toward me, as if considering my words for the first time. "Remembered," he echoed, the word a dry rasp in the silent clearing. "But they are lost, forgotten. No one remembers. I can help you," I said, the words surprising even myself. "I can help you find them, find the owners, reconnect them with their lost things, with their memories." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the trees, the distant murmur of the creek. Then slowly he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Help remember?" he whispered. "Yes, help remember." He reached into his hoard, his hand disappearing into the vast collection of lost things, and pulled out a single object. A small, insignificant thing. A faded blue marble, its surface scratched and worn. He held it out to me, his raspy whisper barely audible. "Wum," he said. "Promise to remember." Promise to return. I took the marble, its smooth coolness strangely comforting in my trembling hand. "I promise," I said. He stepped back then, receding into the shadows, becoming one with his hoard, one with the lost things he had collected, one with the forgotten memories he desperately clung to. I turned and walked away, leaving him in his clearing, surrounded by his treasures, his sadness, his humanity. We left P.1 National Forest the next morning, shaken but unharmed. We reported what we'd found to a park ranger, stumbling through a story that sounded increasingly unbelievable even to our own ears. They promised to investigate, to look into the strange clearing, the lost items, the collector. But they never found anything. The clearing, the hoard, the collector vanished. Lost perhaps to the forest, to memory, to time. I still have the marble. It sits on my desk, a small faded blue sphere, a constant reminder of that night, of the collector, of the unsettling allure of forgotten things. And sometimes, when the silence is deep enough, when the world is quiet enough, I can almost hear the whispers carried on the wind, echoing from the depths of the forest, a raspy, melancholic whisper. Remember, remember. The air hung still and heavy in the meadow, a deceptive peace that settled over everything like a shroud. You wouldn't know, looking at it in the late afternoon sun, that this place could curdle your blood, could twist the familiar into something monstrous. It was beautiful, objectively so. Wildflowers, impossibly vibrant, dotted the tall grass, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't quite feel on my skin. A creek more like a silver ribbon stitched through the green, promising the kind of cold, clear water that soothes a soul parched by city life. My dog Luna, a German Shepherd rescue, with eyes that could see right through you, seemed to agree. She was usually a bundle of nervous energy, a product of her past. But here in this pocket of Olympic National Park, she was almost placid. Playful even. She chased butterflies with a clumsy grace, her tongue lolling out, a happy pant puffing in the quiet air. It was a stark contrast to the cramped apartment we'd left behind. The echoing silence that had become my unwelcome roommate since it all fell apart. "Good, isn't it, girl?" I murmured, scratching behind her ears. Luna leaned into my touch, her fur warm against my hand. Just what we needed. I was talking to her, sure, but also to myself, to the ache in my chest that hadn't quite dulled, the hollow echo of a life that was supposed to be but wasn't. Camping, wilderness. It was supposed to be a reset button, a way to outrun the ghost that haunted my city apartment. We set up camp near the tree line, a dense wall of evergreens that ringed the meadow like watchful sentinels. The tent went up easily, a familiar comfort, and soon a small fire crackled merrily, chasing away the lingering dampness of the forest floor. Luna, usually glued to my side, wandered a little further, sniffing at the unfamiliar scents, her tail giving tentative wags. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, painting the meadow in softer hues, I felt a genuine sense of calm settle over me. The city, the heartbreak, the relentless gray of my days, it all seemed to recede, swallowed by the immensity of the wilderness. Luna, curled up at my feet, let out a contented sigh, a deep rumble in her chest that vibrated against my leg. But it didn't last. That peace, that fragile tranquility, was a thin skin stretched over something else. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A bird call, a robin's cheerful chirp, seemed just a hair off key, a note bent slightly wrong, like a record skipping in a groove you couldn't quite see. I frowned, attributing it to the echoes in the meadow, the way sound sometimes bounced off the trees in strange ways. Then it was the wind, or what I thought was the wind. Rustling through the tall grass, a soft, sighing sound, but different, more like whispers, sibilant and low. Words just below the threshold of hearing, teasing at the edge of comprehension. I glanced at Luna. She was no longer relaxed, her ears were pricked, swiveling, and a low whine rumbled in her throat. Her playful energy had vanished, replaced by an unease that mirrored my own, a feeling crawling up my spine like ice water. The creek, that was the next thing. The gentle gurgle, the soothing babble of water over stones, suddenly took on an unnatural rhythm, a pulse that wasn't quite random, not quite patterned. but something in between, something wrong. It felt like the creek wasn't flowing naturally, but being urged, pushed, like a heartbeat gone erratic. Luna whined again, louder this time, and stood, her hackles rising slightly. She was looking towards the forest edge, her body rigid, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "What is it, girl?" I asked softly, my voice catching in my throat. "What do you hear?" She didn't respond to my voice, her focus entirely on the trees. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her growl deepening, her teeth bared in a silent snarl. I strained my ears, trying to hear what had spooked her. Wind? An animal? But the forest was silent now, the bird calls gone. The wind stilled, the creek just gurgling, that unnatural pulse thrumming beneath the surface of the quiet. That's when the imitation started to become more deliberate, more unsettling. The animal cries, initially distant, now closer, clearer but wrong. A deer bleat, high and mournful, but stretched, elongated, the sound lingering in the air for too long. Twisting into something almost human. A squirrel's chatter, frantic and chattering, but too loud. Too sharp, like teeth grinding together, amplified and distorted. The whispers in the grass intensified. No longer just the sighing of the wind, but distinct sounds, words forming, phrases almost coalescing just beyond the reach of my conscious mind. It was like trying to catch smoke, grasping at something intangible, always slipping away just as I thought I understood. "It's just the wind," I muttered, trying to reassure Luna. Trying to reassure myself, just echoes. The forest, it plays tricks. But Luna wasn't buying it. Her growls intensified, her gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. Something just beyond the edge of the firelight. Something in the deepening shadows of the trees. I tried to rationalize it, desperately clinging to logic. The wind was weird tonight. The echoes were playing tricks. My own anxiety was amplifying everything, making the ordinary sound sinister. But Luna's fear was real, palpable. She wasn't reacting to echoes or wind. She was reacting to something. The whispers became clearer, almost intelligible now. My name, I heard it woven into the rustling grass. Carried on the unnatural wind, a soft, sibilant sound. David, my name. Whispered, drawn out like a sigh, like a caress, like a threat. My heart pounded in my chest. It had to be the wind, just the wind. But the way it formed my name, the way it seemed to be directed at me, felt intentional. Then came the laughter. A woman's laughter, light and airy. A sound I knew, a sound that used to bring me joy. Now twisting in the stillness of the meadow, distorted and menacing. Maria's laughter. But wrong, like a cruel parody, echoing in the twilight, mocking me, reminding me of what I had lost, what I had broken. I stumbled back, away from the fire, away from the sound. Luna barked then, a sharp, frantic sound. Not at the trees, not at the forest, but at nothing. Empty air. And then the most terrifying sound of all. A whine, a low, mournful sound, starting soft, then rising, becoming clearer, more defined. Luna's whine, but wrong. Twisted, a parody of her distress. A distorted echo of her fear. Thrown back at us from the darkness, mimicking her, mocking her, using her own voice against her. Luna whimpered, a small, confused sound, looking around, her eyes darting, searching for the source of the mimicry, the imitation of her own terror. The realization hit me then, a cold, sickening wave of understanding washing over me. It wasn't just imitating sounds. It was targeting me specifically. Using sounds, familiar sounds, intimate sounds, to exploit my deepest fears, my rawest vulnerabilities. Marius' laughter, my name whispered on the wind. Luna's distress. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. It was personal. Panic clawed at my throat, a desperate, choking fear. I was trapped, isolated. And something unseen, unheard, but undeniably present was playing with me, toying with my sanity, using sound itself as a weapon. Luna, sensing my terror, my absolute, gut-wrenching fear, reacted. Not to the sounds this time, not to the whispers or the distorted laughter, but to something else, something I still couldn't perceive, couldn't understand, but she could. She launched herself forward, a blur of fur and fury barking, a ferocious, protective bark. Not at the trees, not at the shadows, but at empty air, at the unseen source of the mimic's voice. At the void that was tormenting me, she was attacking it, barking, snapping, biting at nothing. at the space where the distorted sound seemed to originate, defending me, protecting me from an invisible enemy, a terror woven from sound and fear. The mimic sounds intensified then, as if angered by Luna's defiance, by her protective rage. The whispers became screams, distorted and stretched. My name shrieked in a chorus of voices, some familiar, some alien, all laced with malice. Maria's laughter morphed into a high, hysterical cackle that scraped against my sanity, and Luna's whine, that twisted parody of her distress, became a cacophony of tortured sounds. Barks morphing into howls, whines twisting into shrieks, an overwhelming wave of auditory terror designed to break me, to shatter my mind, to drown me in fear. But Luna fought back. Her barking grew louder, more ferocious, a defiant roar against the unseen enemy, a shield of sound against the psychological assault, against the cacophony of distorted horrors. She was my anchor, my protector, my loyal companion. Standing between me and the void, barking into the empty air, fighting a battle I couldn't see, couldn't understand, but felt with every fiber of my being. And in that moment, amidst the terror and the chaos of distorted sounds, I understood. I had to trust her, not my logic, not my fearful brain, but her instincts, her primal understanding of the unseen world. She knew something I didn't, something beyond human comprehension, something dangerous and malevolent in this meadow, in these woods. I grabbed her collar, my hand trembling, my voice barely a whisper. "Luna, show me. Show me the way." She pulled, straining against the leash, not towards the road, not towards the familiar path, but away from the meadow, towards the higher ground, towards the steeper slopes of the hill, away from the source of the mimic's torment. I followed blindly, trusting her instincts, trusting her unwavering loyalty, trusting the fierce protectiveness that shone in her eyes, even as the cacophony of distorted sounds pursued us, a relentless wave of auditory terror crashing against our backs. We stumbled, we scrambled. We climbed, Luna pulling me upwards, away from the meadow, away from the whispers, away from the laughter, away from the distorted echoes of her own fear. The mimic's influence seemed to weaken as we gained elevation, the sounds fading, becoming less distinct, the oppressive weight of the meadow lifting, just slightly, just enough to breathe. We escaped. We left the meadow behind, that deceptively beautiful trap of wildflowers and tall grass, that silent, watchful clearing where the sounds of nature became weapons of psychological torment. But I was changed. Forever. My perception of nature, once a source of solace and peace, was tainted now, forever colored by the knowledge that even the most beautiful places can harbor unseen terrors, that even the most familiar sounds can be twisted into instruments of fear. Luna stayed close, always close, her presence a constant comfort, a silent promise of protection. Our bond, forged in the crucible of that night, deepened, strengthened, something unbreakable now, something that transcended words. The meadow remains, I know, somewhere out there, silent and beautiful, deceptively serene, a perfect trap for the unwary, a stage for the mimics, endless sound-based theater of terror. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I swear I can still hear it. A faint, distorted echo of laughter, a whisper of my name, a chilling reminder that some terrors once encountered. I sat there, engine-eider, and never truly leave you. The forest has always held a certain weight. Not just the weight of ancient trees pressing down the sky or the damp weight of fog clinging to the underbrush, but a heavier, more sentient weight. It's a feeling you learn to recognize, working as a ranger in Redwood National Park. You tell yourself it's just the isolation, the sheer scale of the place dwarfing your human concerns. But sometimes, late at night, patrolling the back trails, you can't shake the sense that the woods are aware of you, watching, listening. Lately, that feeling had been amplified, sharpened to an edge. It started subtly, whispers through the dispatch radio, static laced with unease, malfunctioning equipment, radios cutting out in certain sectors, GPS units spinning wildly, erratic animal behavior, deer bolting. For no reason, birds falling silent mid-song. Then came the disappearances. Not hikers lost on poorly marked trails. That was sadly routine. These were different, experienced backpackers, sticking to established routes, vanishing without a trace. No gear found, no distress calls, just gone. Ishop tore a mun apparel. Her voice, usually a calm island in the sea of static, had started to sound frayed. Elias, we're getting another call. Hiker group, North Sector 6, near Elorn Grove. They're reporting disturbances. Unexplained noises, equipment failures, and they think someone's watching them. Elorn Grove. Even the name sent a prickle of unease down my spine. It wasn't on any official maps, wasn't advertised to tourists. It was old growth, a pocket of ancient redwoods considered ecologically fragile, off-limits to the public. Officially, it was closed for environmental assessment. Unofficially, everyone knew it was best left alone. Locals whispered stories, of course. Whispers of a place that was different, protected, angry. It always dismissed them as folklore, the kind of tales that cling to forgotten corners of the wilderness. Now, listening to Carol's increasingly strained reports, those whispers felt less like superstition and more like warnings. Disturbances, Carol. I keyed the mic on my shoulder, my voice calm, professional. Can you be more specific? Static crackled, then her voice distorted, tight with an edge of something I couldn't quite place fear. They're saying equipment's failing. Flashlights, compasses, everything digital. And they hear sounds. Like branches breaking, but wrong. Too heavy, too deliberate, and they keep feeling like they're being watched, Elias. Like something's out there in the trees, all right, Carol? I'm heading to North Sector 6 now. Get me coordinates for the hiker group. I switched off the mic, a knot tightening in my gut. This wasn't just some lost hikers. This was something else, something that felt cold, ancient, and wrong. The drive to North Sector 6 was unsettling in itself. The fog, typical for redwood country, was unusually thick, pressing close to the road, swallowing the sunlight. The air grew heavy, still, the usual forest sounds muted, replaced by an oppressive silence. As I neared Elorn Grove, my own radio started to act up, static hissing through the speaker, Carol's voice breaking into fragments. Zeo Hirmegrove Danger, Carol, you're breaking up. Repeat, please. More static, then silence. I tried switching channels, adjusting the squelch. Nothing. Dead air. I glanced at my GPS, the screen flickering erratically, coordinates jumping, direction spinning wildly. Modern technology useless against what? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the road, the growing sense of unease tightening its grip. I reached the trailhead for North Sector 6, a narrow, overgrown path barely visible from the service road. No other vehicles in sight. I parked the truck, double-checked my equipment, flashlight. Radio useless as it was. First aid kit. Bear spray, sidearm compass, the analog kind, thank God. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and stepped into the woods. The grove was different immediately. Even through the fog, the sheer scale of the redwoods was breathtaking, their ancient trunks rising like pillars to a canopy lost in the mist. But it wasn't just their size. It was the silence, the oppressive stillness. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in Elorn Grove. I followed the faint trail, calling out for the hiker group. Park ranger, can anyone hear me? My voice echoed back, swallowed by the dense foliage unanswered. The first sign was subtle, almost easily missed. A discarded water bottle, tucked beneath a fern, not quite hidden, not quite abandoned. Plastic, modern, incongruous in this ancient place. Then, further down the trail, a campsite, or what was left of one. A tent ripped to shreds, nylon flapping in the non-existent breeze, sleeking bags torn open, stuffing scattered like feathers. Food canisters dented, crushed as if by immense force, but no sign of people. No bodies, no gear, just wreckage. My radio crackled to life suddenly, startling me. Carol's voice clearer now, but still laced with that tremor. Elias, do you copy? We've lost contact with another group, same sector, Elorn Grove vicinity. They were supposed to check in an hour ago. And we're getting reports from other hikers. They're saying they're hearing voices, whispering in the trees, and something's watching them. Carol, I'm at a ransacked campsite. Looks recent. No sign of the hikers. Radio still cutting out, GPS is useless. I keyed off, a cold dread settling in my stomach. This was escalating and fast. Further into the grove, the evidence grew more disturbing. Another campsite, even more violently ransacked. This one had been burned, the remains of a fire pit still smoldering, the air thick with the acrid smell of charred nylon and cooked food. But it wasn't just ransacked, it felt violated, unnatural. The tents weren't just ripped. They were twisted, contorted, as if something had tried to fold them inside out. Equipment wasn't just broken, it was mangled. Twisted metal, shattered plastic, wood splintered with impossible force. Then I saw the blood. Not much, just streaks, dark and viscous against the damp earth, leading away from the campsite into the deeper woods. Blood trails leading nowhere. I followed one for a while, pushing through thick underbrush, the silence pressing in, the feeling of being watched intensifying. The blood trail ended abruptly at the base of a massive redwood, disappearing into the damp soil as if swallowed by the earth itself. No body, no sign of a struggle, just gone. My radio crackled again, Carol's voice now bordering on panic. "Elias, we've got park visitors. They're coming out of the woods, North Sector 6. They're disoriented, terrified. They're saying they were stalked by something in the grove." Something unseen. I headed back towards the trail, the urgency in Carol's voice driving me. I found the park visitors near the trailhead, a group of three, huddled together, shivering. Despite the damp air, their faces pale, eyes wide with a fear that went beyond simple disorientation. "Ranger Thorne," one of them, a young woman, stammered, her voice trembling. "Thank God you're here. We were attacked." Attacked? I knelt beside her, my voice calm, reassuring, the professional ranger taking over, masking the growing fear that churned inside me. What happened? Was it an animal? A bear? She shook her head, eyes darting nervously towards the woods. No animal. It was something else, something unseen. It punished us. For being in the grove. Punished us. The words hung in the air, heavy with an unnerving implication. I questioned them further, piece by piece, trying to make sense of their disjointed, terrified accounts. They'd strayed off the marked trail, drawn by the grove's ancient beauty. They'd felt watched, then stalked. Equipment malfunctioned, flashlights died. Compasses spun, phones went dead. Then the sound started, whispers, rustling, branches breaking. And the feeling, always the feeling of something unseen, close, malevolent. It was like the woods were alive, the young woman whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Like the trees were moving, watching us, punishing us. Punished for entering the grove. The words echoed Carol's earlier report. The local whispers, the uneasy feeling that had been growing in me since ID entered Elorn Grove. I looked back at the woods, the ancient redwoods shrouded in fog, silent, watchful. And for the first time I felt it myself. It's not just the feeling of being watched, but something colder, heavier, pressing down on me. The air grew colder. The fog seemed to thicken around me, and the trees, yes, they seemed to be moving. Subtly, imperceptibly, but moving nonetheless. I spent the rest of the afternoon patrolling the grove, pushing deeper into the off-limits area, searching for answers, for any rational explanation for what was happening. I found more ransacked campsites, more blood trails leading nowhere, more equipment twisted and broken in unnatural ways, and everywhere the feeling of being watched, the oppressive silence, the sense of something ancient and malevolent stirring in the woods. My own radio remained useless, spitting static, picking up fragments of distorted voices, whispers that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Once I thought I heard my own name, Elias, whispered on the static, a sibilant, chilling sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Another time I picked up something else, not human voices, but organic sounds. Rattling, clicking, rustling, like leaves and branches moving, but too loud, too deliberate, too wrong. As dusk approached, I found them. Carvings, not on fallen logs or small trees, but on the massive trunks of the ancient redwoods themselves. Symbols, intricate patterns, etched deep into the bark, almost swallowed by the wood's own natural texture, but undeniably there. Circles, spirals, jagged lines, geometric shapes that seemed to writhe and shift in the fading light. They were clustered near the heart of the grove, deeper into the off-limit zone, as if marking a boundary, a warning. And then I remembered. Local legends. Whispered stories. dismissed as folklore but suddenly chillingly relevant. Stories at Alorn Grove, considered sacred by the local tribes, a place of power, guarded by an ancient entity, a spirit of the redwoods, a guardian they called it, that punished those who disrespected the grove, who violated its sacred space. Stories of disappearances, strange occurrences, warnings passed down through generations. I'd heard them before, of course, but always dismissed them as just stories. Now, standing in the deepening twilight, surrounded by the silent, watchful redwoods, the ransacked campsites, the blood trails, the carvings, the whispers, the terrified accounts of park visitors, the legends felt less like folklore and more like history. I knew then, with a chilling certainty that went beyond logic, that whatever was happening in Alorn Grove wasn't natural. It wasn't animals. It wasn't poachers. It wasn't just mass hysteria. It was something else. Something ancient, powerful, and angry. Something that was tied to this grove, guarding it, enforcing its own form of justice. And I, a park ranger sworn to protect these woods, was about to face it. The decision wasn't rational, wasn't logical, wasn't even particularly brave. It was something deeper, a compulsion, a need to understand, to confront the fear that had been building all day. I had to see it. I had to know. Against every instinct screaming at me to retreat, to call for backup, to get the hell out of Alorn Grove, I decided to go deeper, to the heart of the grove, to face the guardian. The heart of the grove was different even from the rest of the off-limits area. The trees were older, taller, their trunks impossibly thick, their canopies so dense they blotted out the last vestiges of twilight. The fog here was almost solid, a swirling, suffocating presence that seemed to press against me, steal my breath. The silence was absolute, deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I moved slowly, deliberately, deeper into the grove's center, my flashlight beam cutting a weak swathe through the fog, revealing nothing but more trees, more shadows, more oppressive silence. I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Hello? Is anyone there?" "Im Ranger Thorn, Im here to help." Silence. Then a sound. Not a whisper, not a rustle, not branches breaking, but something else. A groaning, a creaking, a deep resonant sound that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low thrumming that resonated in my bones. The air grew colder, heavier, and the fog began to swirl around me, faster now, forming patterns, shapes that seemed to coalesce and dissolve in the periphery of my vision. Then I saw it. It's not a creature, not a monster, not anything I could have possibly imagined. It wasn't a thing. It was a place. The grove itself coming alive. The trees, the ancient redwoods, twisting, shifting, their trunks groaning, their branches intertwining, coalescing, flowing together like liquid wood. Liquid shadow. It was a transformation, a becoming, a horrifying, awe-inspiring metamorphosis unfolding before my eyes. The trees rose, impossibly tall, their forms blurring, merging, taking on a shape. A form that was vaguely humanoid, towering, immense. Wood and bark and shadow, twisting and swirling, coalescing into limbs, a torso, a head, a face that wasn't a face, just a hollow space filled with points of light, ancient green light that burned through the fog. Through me, into my soul. The guardian. It spoke, not with a voice, not in words I could understand in the traditional sense, but with something else. The rustling of leaves, the groaning of wood, the sighing of wind through ancient branches, all blending together into a sound that resonated within me. A voice that spoke not to my ears, but to something deeper, older, more primal, disrespect. The feeling, the understanding, hit me like a physical blow, a wave of ancient sorrow, ancient anger. You trespass, you violate, you do not understand. The towering form shifted, softened slightly. The points of light that were its eyes focusing on me, not with anger now, but with something assessing. Humans. Always taking, always destroying. This grove is sacred. Protected. You do not belong here. Fear, pure and primal, gripped me, paralyzed me. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Respect, awe, understanding. I looked at the guardian, at the towering form made of wood and shadow, at the ancient green light burning in its hollow eyes, and I understood. So this wasn't evil, wasn't malicious. It was a force, a guardian, protecting something sacred, something ancient, something humans had forgotten how to respect. Green on every ounce of courage, every shred of my ranger training, every fiber of respect for nature that Professor Martinez had instilled in me. I spoke, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror that still gripped me. Guardian, I said, the word feeling strange, inadequate in the face of this entity. I understand. I respect this grove. I'm here to protect it, not harm it. I'm a ranger. I'm here to help. The guardian's form shifted again, softening further. The wood and shadow seeming to flow less violently. The ancient green light dimming slightly, it listened. Not in the human sense of listening to words, but in something deeper, something that felt like feeling. Feeling my intent, my respect, my genuine desire to protect this place. Protect, it echoed the rustling leaves, the groaning wood, the sighing wind, now tinged with something questioning. You protect. Humans protect, yes, I said. My voice gaining strength, conviction. That's my job, that's what I do. I protect the forest, all of it. Including this grove, silence, a long considering silence. The guardian's form remained still, the ancient green light dim, almost extinguished. Then, slowly, subtly, it shifted again, softening, dissolving, the wood and shadow flowing apart. The towering form receding, shrinking, becoming less defined, less solid, until finally it was gone. The trees stood still again. The fog began to dissipate. The silence remained, but it was different now. Not oppressive, not malevolent, but watchful. Go, the feeling, the understanding, washed over me. Softer now, less a command, more a dismissal. Never trespass again, tell others. The grove is protected. I will enforce the boundaries. I left the grove, shaken, terrified, but alive, and changed. I understood then. The legends were real, the guardian was real, and the grove was protected. I became the protector of the grove in my own way. I diverted hikers, spread warnings, marked trails far from its boundaries. Officially, I filed reports about equipment malfunctions and strange animal behavior, attributing them to natural causes. Unofficially, I became a silent guardian, alongside the ancient entity of the redwoods. The Lorne Grove remains untouched, revered, a place of power and terrifying beauty, forever guarded. And I, Elias Thorne, park ranger, became one of its keepers, forever bound to the secrets of the redwoods. Forever changed by the night I faced the guardian of the grove. It started with the silence. It's not the absence of sound, but a silence that felt thick, heavy, like a blanket suffocating the world. I'm Dave Reynolds, and I've always sought out quiet, a break from the relentless hum of city life, from the endless chatter of my own thoughts. That's why she come to Zion, to this unnamed canyon tucked away in a corner of the park. Most tourists never bothered to explore. It was early October, the tail end of the season, and the canyon walls, towering sandstone monoliths, glowed with a muted, almost melancholic beauty under the autumn sun. The hike in had been everything ID hoped for: solitary, challenging, breathtaking. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and dry earth. The canyon floor, a winding ribbon of sand and rock, narrowed and widened, revealing hidden alcoves and sun-drenched plateaus. I'd set out early, before dawn had fully broken, wanting to lose myself in the rhythm of my boots on the trail, the steady burn in my thighs, the vast, indifferent grandeur of the landscape. By midday, ID reached a point, deep within the canyon where the walls closed in, casting long, cool shadows even at the sun's zenith. The acoustics were remarkable, every rustle of my jacket, every crunch of gravel underfoot echoed back to me, amplified and distorted by the canyon's embrace. It was a place that felt ancient, untouched, a sanctuary from the noise and chaos of the modern world. I ate lunch perched on a ledge overlooking a dry wash, savoring the solitude and the stunning vista. The silence pressed in again, heavier now, almost expectant. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the canyon scale, its immensity dwarfing any sound I could make. I hiked for another couple of hours, deeper and deeper into the canyon's embrace, until the shadows grew long and the air began to chill. It was time to turn back, I knew, if I wanted to reach my campsite before nightfall. The hike back was quicker, downhill, and I found myself falling into a comfortable rhythm, my mind emptying, my senses absorbing the canyon's subtle shifts in light and shadow. I reached my campsite just as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of lavender and gold. I was tired, content, and looking forward to a simple meal and a night under the stars. I woke up to the sound of birdsong, the same birdsong I realized with a jolt. Edie heard that morning. Disoriented, I sat up in my tent, the familiar canvas walls enclosing me. Sunlight streamed through the tent fabric, painting it a warm, inviting orange. I checked my watch, 71:17 a.m. Early, but not unreasonably so. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, expecting to see the familiar layout of my campsite. The fire pit I'd built, the gear I'd carefully organized. But something was wrong. Terribly, subtly wrong. The sun was in the wrong position, lower in the sky than it should have been for mid-morning. The air was cooler, damper, the scent of pine heavier, almost cloying. And then I saw my footprints leading away from the campsite, disappearing into the canyon. My footprints from yesterday's hike. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This was impossible. I broke in camp yesterday afternoon, packed everything, and settled in for the night. I must be dreaming, I thought. A bizarre, hyper-realistic dream. I pinched myself hard. Pain flared sharp and real. Not a dream. I went through my morning routine mechanically. Coffee, a quick breakfast, packing up my gear. Each action felt surreal, disconnected, as if I were moving through a film, watching myself from a distance. As I started hiking, the path felt familiar. Too familiar. It was like walking a route I'd memorized, every twist and turn, every rock and shadow already known. Then it hit me, a sickening wave of realization. I had walked this path before. Yesterday. This wasn't just familiarity, it was repetition. I was reliving yesterday. Panic began to bubble up, hot and suffocating. Time loops, those were things in movies, in sci-fi novels, not real life. But the evidence was undeniable. The sun, the footprints, the unnerving sense of déjà-vu. I tried to deviate from the path, veering off into the undergrowth, hoping to break the cycle, to force a change. The canyon resisted. Thorns snagged at my clothes. Loose rocks slid under my boots, and the undergrowth seemed to thicken, pushing me back subtly, insistently towards the trail. It was like an unseen hand guiding me, or perhaps the canyon itself, unwilling to let me stray. Defeated, disoriented, I returned to the trail, the familiar path stretching out before me, the same path I'd walked yesterday, the same path I was walking today. The time loop, or whatever this was real, and I was trapped in it. The next iterations became a blur, a disorienting kaleidoscope of repeated actions and mounting dread. I woke up each morning to the same birdsong, the same sunrise, the same crushing realization that time was broken, that I was caught in an endless repeating cycle. I tried everything to break the loop. I stayed in my tent all day, refusing to hike. The next morning I woke up on the trail halfway down the canyon, my feet moving without conscious volition. I tried hiking in the opposite direction, deeper into the canyon, hoping to find the loop's exit, its breaking point. The canyon walls closed in, the path twisted and turned, leading me back. Inevitably to the same point, the same time, the same damn day. With each repetition, subtle changes began to manifest, unsettling anomalies that chipped away at my sanity. Shadows shifted at impossible angles, stretching and distorting in ways that defied the sun's position. Wildlife behaved erratically. Birds flying in panic circles, deer staring blankly at me, their eyes vacant and lifeless. And then there were the whispers. At first they were faint, almost subliminal, barely audible over the wind and the rustle of leaves, but they grew stronger with each loop, clearer, more insistent. Whispers that seemed to emanate from the canyon walls themselves, from the very rock and stone that enclosed me. They mimicked my own voice, echoing fragments of my thoughts, my fears, my deepest regrets. Then they began to whisper other voices. Voices I didn't recognize. Voices filled with despair, with fear, with a chilling, echoing emptiness. In one loop, driven by a desperate need for answers, for some explanation for this temporal prism. I started searching for clues, for anything that might shed light on the canyon's strange properties. I scoured my campsite, the trail, the surrounding area, my eyes scanning every rock, every tree, every shadow. I found them tucked under a loose rock near the trail, faded ranger reports, their paper brittle with age, their ink blurred by time and moisture. They detailed a tragic incident. A group of hikers lost a canyon decades ago, caught in a sudden, unseasonal blizzard. Rescue efforts had been hampered by the canyon's treacherous terrain and the worsening weather. The reports ended abruptly, incomplete, with a chilling final entry: no survivors located. Echoes only. Echoes. The word resonated in my mind, a dark, unsettling echo of its own. Were the whispers echoes of those lost hikers, their despair, their final moments of terror, trapped within the canyon walls? In another loop, I found carvings in the rock face near a narrow passage I'd passed countless times without noticing them. They were crude, almost childlike, but undeniably human, scratched into the sandstone with a sharp stone. Names, dates, and fragments of sentences. Lost cold, no way out helped me. The last carving was simply a single word, etched deep into the rock, raw and desperate echoes. The whispers intensified, growing more coherent, more insistent. They weren't just mimicking my voice now, they were speaking to me directly, personally. Whispers of despair, of hopelessness, of inescapable doom. You're trapped, Dave, no way out. Join us, join the echoes. The canyon, I realized, wasn't just a setting for this nightmare. It was the antagonist, the entity manipulating time, playing psychological tricks, feeding on my fear, my despair. It was the source of the echoes, the keeper of the canyon's tragic history. And it was trying to trap me, to add my despair to the chorus, to perpetuate the cycle. In one iteration, fueled by a desperate, reckless hope, I pushed deeper into the canyon than ever before. I ignored the trail, scrambling over boulders, forcing my way through dense undergrowth, driven by a primal urge to break free, to find the loop's source, its heart. The canyon resisted, the terrain growing more treacherous, the whispers louder, more menacing. Turn back, Dave. You can't escape, despair is inevitable. But I pushed on, driven by a stubborn refusal to succumb, to surrender to the canyon's will, and then I saw it. Hidden behind a waterfall, concealed by a curtain of cascading water, was a cave. It's not a natural cave, but something else. The entrance was unnaturally smooth, almost perfectly circular, like a wound in a rock face. A faint, shimmering light emanated from within, a pulsating, unnatural glow that resonated with the rhythmic thrumming I'd heard on the first night. This was it, I knew, the source of the time loop, the heart of the canyon's darkness. I hesitated at the entrance, a wave of fear washing over me, cold and paralyzing. But the whispers urged me forward, a chorus of voices, ancient and despairing. Enter, Dave, embrace the echoes. Join us in eternity. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself against the rising tide of terror, I stepped into the cave. The air inside was thick, heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. The shimmering light pulsed from a fissure in the rock face at the back of the cave, a pulsating anomaly, radiating an energy that made my skin crawl. My teeth ached. The echoes intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices, a swirling vortex of despair, of terror, of final echoing screams. And then the canyon spoke, not in whispers now, but in a voice that resonated through the very stone, through my bones, through my soul. A voice that was ancient, vast, and utterly terrifyingly empty. You are trapped, David Reynolds. Like them, like all who have come before, your despair will feed the echoes. Your fear will perpetuate the cycle. Images flooded my mind, fragmented visions of the canyon's tragic history, the lost hikers caught in the blizzard, their frozen bodies entombed in the snow, ancient tribes who had revered and feared this place, whispering warnings of a canyon that devoured souls, the logging operations abandoned, leaving behind a stain of unnatural energy. The canyon was a vessel of despair, a temporal anomaly, fueled by the suffering of those who had perished within its walls. And it wanted me to join them, to become another echo in its endless, repeating cycle. Despair threatened to engulf me, to pull me under, to make me surrender to the canyon's will. But something within me, a stubborn spark of defiance, refused to be extinguished. I thought of Maria, not the emptiness of her absence, but the warmth of her laughter, the strength of her spirit. I thought of Carlos, his unwavering friendship, his belief in me even when I'd lost faith in myself. I thought of my father, his weathered hands guiding me through the forest, his voice echoing in my memory, La La Samael. El Maze, the canyon was wrong. Despair wasn't inevitable. Hope, even in the face of utter darkness, was still a choice. And I chose hope. I closed my eyes, blocking out the shimmering light, the cacophony of echoes, the canyon's suffocating presence. I focused on those positive memories, those sparks of light in my life, letting them fill me, strengthen me, push back against the encroaching despair. I focused on the future, on the possibility of healing, of rebuilding, of finding a way forward even after loss, even after terror. And slowly, subtly, something began to shift. The cacophony of echoes softened. The shimmering light dimmed. The oppressive weight of the canyon began to lift. The air in the cave grew lighter, cleaner, no longer charged with that unnatural energy. When I opened my eyes, the cave was ordinary, just rock and stone, no anomaly, no shimmering light. The whispers were gone, replaced by the faint sound of wind in the trees outside. The time loop was broken. I stumbled out of the cave, blinking in the returning sunlight. The canyon air felt different, lighter, freer. The birds were singing again, the insects buzzing, the forest alive with sound, with life. The shadows were normal, predictable, moving with the sun, not against it. I hiked out of the canyon quickly, purposefully, not looking back. The trail was clear, the path familiar, leading me back towards the world I'd almost lost. I reached my campsite, packed up my gear, and drove away from Zion National Park. Forever changed by my experience. The canyon remains, I know, trapped in its temporal anomaly, echoing with the despair of the past. A silent, stone sentinel, a warning to those who venture too deep and lose hope. I carry the echoes with me too, a haunting reminder of the canyon's power, the fragility of time, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. So now they are not whispers of despair, but echoes of hope, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest canyons, even in the face of inescapable doom, hope, however fragile, can still find a way to break through.